some of the bravest people I've ever met.
Because you will have lost guys under your command. How difficult is that?
Their life is reliant on you and your life is reliant on them.
Andrew, welcome back. We're going to talk some more about Ukraine and the war that you've seen up close as well. Obviously, it's not just about tactics and drones. It's also about the people that are fighting this war, the men and women who are on the front line there, and the effect that it has on them. I mean, you were a major in the parachute regiment, a company commander. You commanded younger men probably than we're seeing in Ukraine, frankly, under your command in Afghanistan. But you've been up close. What about their morale at the moment? The Russians are still taking ground, albeit slowly. But what did you find?
Well, the troops I spoke to, they talk a very good game in the sense that they know that this is a foreign observer coming in, and they don't want to say anything, that might be seen as not in the quite right spirits. But they do have a problem with desertion. That has been an issue. That said, the troops that I spoke to, I was there for long enough that I don't think they were making stuff up. They were motivated, they were patriotic, and that was a very powerful motivator for them as well, is the fact that they were defending their country. And when you see a conflict framed in that way, especially when my background is expeditionary wars of choice, you can tell the difference.
I mean, let's roll this video here because we can see the conditions in which they're living in. It's obviously, we were saying before about trenches being covered now, nothing's out in the open. And I mean, I've been into these in Sumy, and they do keep them very warm and cozy. Actually, they're remarkably good at making life as bearable as they can do in the conditions. But what do you think motivates these guys to keep fighting on under this sustained pressure with all these losses and this kind of existential threat to their country? Again, maybe it is that.
Yeah, there's also the troops left and right of them. You did get a real sense of brotherhood between the troops I saw anyway. There was also a powerful religious faith as well.
Right.
We had a padre with us who was doing the rounds too. And every group of troops that we ran into stopped and asked for a prayer. And so, that was their faith in religion was clearly a powerful thing for them as well. But yeah, you've got the national survival, but you've also got your mates to your left and your right, and in their case, they've also got their faith. So it's quite a powerful mix. And
leadership in this circumstance. I mean, you learn leadership as an officer in the British Army. There's textbooks about it, aren't there? I guess these guys won't have necessarily had that experience, but as leaders, how did you find them?
Well, look, speaking to the troops about their leaders was the most interesting thing. And some of the commanders, are almost worshipped, quite frankly, which I found really interesting. I'm sure there are some that aren't very popular. There must be. They weren't going to talk about those, but certainly, even up to the brigade command level, these guys were there in the mix with their troops. In many cases, leading from the front. In many cases, just being there to provide the brilliant planning that they needed to make sure they survived the operations they're going into. And yeah, they all the ones I spoke to had very high opinions of their leadership, which is, hopefully a reflection of how well they're doing.
And these are older soldiers that they're leading. These aren't 18-year-olds like you may have had on Herrick's, for instance. Yeah, they've been around the block. These guys. I mean, leading them in this war probably isn't that easy sometimes.
Yeah, and I wonder how much the fact that they respect their commanders is connected to the fact that those commanders wouldn't be there if they weren't up to the job. One of the brigades I was with, their commander had died maybe a month and a half earlier. So it was the deputy brigade commander who was acting brigade commander that we were talking to, and you could see how heavily the loss of that brigade commander weighed on the troops underneath him. When his name came up, you could see the sort of change in facial expression and body language. They were obviously still grieving this guy, and that's quite impactful, I think. When a senior commander goes down and people feel it that strongly as subordinates, it shows you what a good job they must have been doing.
And what's that like? Because you would have lost guys under your command in combat, and you will have seen the effect that have an effect on you clearly, but it will also have an effect on the guys around them to keep morale up, to keep guys fighting when that happens. How difficult is that?
Well, I think the difference with us and the Ukrainians is this is happening to them, if not every day, every hour.
Yeah.
That's the scale of loss that they're facing. if we lost a guy, every day, your platoon would soon be very quickly not functioning whatsoever, I suspect, because it wasn't a war where, yes, we had 450 plus killed in action, and we had many, many hundreds more wounded, but it was nothing compared to what these guys are going through. And I don't mean that to diminish the British Army's efforts in Afghanistan, but it does give you an idea of the sheer scale that the Ukrainians are facing losses on. So I don't know if they get hardened to it. I don't know if they, feel each one as painfully as maybe we would have, or somewhere in the middle. But loss is a factor in warfare, and there isn't a war in history where one side took no casualties, and unfortunately that is the job. And when you sign up, you know that ultimate liability is one of the risks that you're signing up to.
I mean, does it damage cohesion if you lose somebody from a group like that, or what's the effect?
No, I always found our guys cracked on very well.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, as a commander, you needed to put out an arm around people. I remember Private Ford. I served with the Mercians on my first tour. He was just shy of his 19th birthday, and on his 19th birthday, what would have been, we made sure that the platoon marked it. I think it was a cup of hot chocolate passed around in his honour, sort of thing. You had to, make sure that sacrifice was acknowledged, and that it was, there was a little bit of space and time to grieve, but then on with the job. And all the guys knew that, to be fair. And
one of the things that occurred to me is they you had the, and I say luxury not in the real sense, but you had you knew that you could get CASEVAC, the MERT would come if you got yourself into some real trouble. They don't have that luxury. Would that affect the way they command and conduct operations?
I don't think so. It wouldn't be part of your. You wouldn't change tactics because you can't get your casualties out, unfortunately, and that's something the British Army will have to go back to. And they already were when I was going through Sanders as an instructor. Is if you get wounded, you get on the axis and you wait for the chain to sweep you up, rather than everything stop. The casualty is now the priority, as it was in Afghanistan. So that is a change in mindset that's needed. But when you get casualties in Ukraine who are on the ground for many hours before they get CASEVAC, when you can't get the surgical vehicles or the medical vehicles any closer than 12 to 15 kilometres to the point of wounding, obviously that is a real challenge. But that's one for the G4, for the CSS chain to sweep up, the combat service support, rather than the contact commander. That's not what he's worrying about. He's worrying about completing his mission.
We'll talk in a moment about a pretty amazing mission that they did. Did you hear Ukrainian soldiers talking about death, about losing people? Is it something they did, and was it the same conversations you guys would have had?
No, and in fact, the one occasion it came up, the soldier we were talking to kind of almost broke down. He didn't, but you could see him struggling to control his face, and he wouldn't talk anymore after that. So it's clearly something that has weighed heavily on the Ukrainian troops, but I think they're putting it in their top pockets for now, getting on with the war.
Because they're storing up, I'd imagine, a huge amount of
trauma, undeniably. Yeah. And that is going to take its toll on them at some point.
Yeah.
But for now, they're holding it down.
What do you think, as a civilian watching this war, civilians, me, everyone, we don't understand about the fighting we're seeing, about the impact and the human cost it has?
I think what you wouldn't understand if you'd been through it is the bonds left and right of you, and how strong you do feel for the person to your left and your right, because their life is reliant on you and your life is reliant on them. And there aren't many situations in life where that's a thing. You and I sat here. I'm not reliant on you for getting out of this room safely. Whereas if we were in a combat situation, then that would be the case. And it does leave that impact and that scar when you do lose that person that you've placed so much trust and you've built such a bond with. So that's the real challenge, I think, when it comes to the emotional level of this, because not only have you got a stronger bond that's just been severed, you've still got to keep fighting and keep doing your job and park that pain for a later time. And that's incredibly difficult to do, and it does take a big toll.
I mean, we went to Sumy and we were in a bunker, and there was a chap there with some pictures that his little girl had drawn, and he'd not seen her for a year. And because these deployments are never ending, again, what does that do? You knew you were going to go to Afghan for 6 months, and all being well, you'd go home. They don't know that. It's just they get R&R, but it just goes on and on and on. How do you continue your focus and your desire to fight?
Well, as you say, for 6 months you've got a dead set end. You've got the R&R in the middle. which actually some people preferred not to do. I mean, they had to do it, but they would have rather not have done, because it kind of broke the flow and took you out of that mindset you need to be in when you're focused on that mission at hand. But certainly the Ukrainian soldiers I've spoken to who have been on the front for 3 years at a time, the motivation is for them patriotism, which I think in many ways for us, king and country is very, very abstract. That used to be, that's World War I stuff. I'm signing up to fight for king and country. Whereas now you sign up because you want a skill set, or because you want a trade, or because you want to have a bit of adventure and fun. It's never really framed in, join for king and country. Whereas for the Ukrainians, they're doing this for Ukraine. They're doing this for their people, and they know that if they don't do the job, that wife and that daughter you were just talking about at home are going to be under threat from the Russians. So it must be incredibly tough to be away for that period of time. But on the flip side, they know that if they weren't there, then that lovely family at home are the ones who could be abducted into Russia or killed by Russian bombs. I'd imagine that is very motivating.
Yeah. Did you actually see some of the medivac stuff taking place? How good they've got at that?
No, didn't see it first time.
Right.
No.
I mean, because we'll show this video, and you know the story of this as well. This is this incredible story of this guy that was effectively behind. He's in enemy lines, or he was just in no man's land.
Yeah, he was just in an area where it's 33 days, I believe.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, and the Ukrainians sent this a UGV, robot vehicle, if you like, with this pod on top to go and rescue him. And they did it many times. I think 7 times they had to send this thing to actually, because they were destroyed by things.
It's getting smashed.
We talked earlier about the British Army watching this stuff and learning from it. This is also an incredible thing to view.
It is. And, we have to take the right lessons away. Do we want those more UGVs in the British Army? Discuss. Because certainly, to take 7 hits before you finally get the guy off the ground, for them to be 33 days waiting for that medical care is not the ideal situation by a very long stretch. And we probably want to try and work out how we avoid that situation so that we don't have someone lying there for 33 days with 7 attempts. But what that does show as well, I think, is the value the Ukrainians are placing on that human
absolutely.
life. The Russians are feeding their people to the beast without really caring who lives and who dies, whereas you've got the Ukrainians here. The soldier's name was Maxim. They did everything they could to get this guy off the ground to safety, and that's a real telling difference between the two sides.
Yeah, I thought exactly that. It was, you would think in a war where there's so many people dying, this much effort for one single guy would be something they wouldn't necessarily, unfortunately, do, but they did. And it's an incredible story, and how they managed to get him back. In terms of just talking soldier to these guys, what do you feel about the cost it is having on them?
Yeah, it's horrible, and sort of professional to professional, they had my undying respect, actually. Yeah, and I can't honestly say that I did fight in a war. I fought in a counterinsurgency policing operation. There was a war of choice on the other side of the world. These guys are scrapping tooth and nail for their country land on a daily basis in horrendous conditions, against these terrifying drones that are trying to hunt them on a daily basis, against the artillery, the glide bombs. That is brutal. And the fact that they're not only holding their own, they're causing huge attrition on their enemy, and they're so motivated to defend their country. My undying respect, and certainly the guys I met were genuine warriors and some of the bravest people I've ever met.
I mean, and going back to the British Army aspect of it, again, that is something we will have to learn, that level of attrition, being under that amount of constant fire, not necessarily something you had in Afghan. You would have firefights, but they weren't as intense and prolonged and numerous as this. Yeah,
I mean, the Taliban had maybe a Chinese rocket or an RPG, but they certainly didn't have heavy artillery that they could bring to bear on us. And that very much shaped how we conducted ourselves, because we had a lot more freedom than the Ukrainians did. We could sunbathe in between patrols if we had the time. You would not do that anymore, because a drone would get you while you're applying the factor 50. So the British Army, I mean, as a society, I think not just the Army, our society has to get used to the idea of taking casualties like that if we do end up in a war on Europe's eastern borders. And I think that's a big question. Does British society have that appetite or that tolerance for that many of its young men and women to come home in coffins rather than on on flights. And I think it goes back to what we talked about on the earlier episodes, and that is that it's about the basics. When it comes down to soldiering, it's about being able to do those basics well all the time and then adapting them to the situation you're in. And that is a lesson from Afghanistan that I think we can take forward, is that it still worked in Afghanistan, it's working in Ukraine, and it'll work next time the British Army go to war. And
finally, as a soldier, do you carry, as they will carry in the future, which they hopefully will survive, but do you carry your memories of that war with you all the time, every day? Something comes up in your mind about what you went through?
Yeah, and in some ways you do that deliberately. I have some of my platoon photos and company photos as the background on my laptop because it's something I'm really proud of. And I'm really proud of my soldiers, and I'm really proud that I got to command them, and it's something I like being reminded of. When it comes to the muckier stuff, that's something you try and forget. And most of the time you can, but sort of anniversaries and things like that are clearly days that weigh heavily on the mind.
And you will have made friends in Ukraine, presumably, or at least acquaintances, people that you keep in contact with. They are impressive as individuals and as soldiers. What's your sort of lasting thought about what they're going through and what cost it will have on them?
Well, I really like the Ukrainian people generally. They were generous, they were brave, and they were hardy. And they're experiencing something that I don't think anyone in the UK can really find a comparable experience to. Living in that minus 20 degree temperature whilst your power goes off. Even civilians in Kiev are enduring this, and yet they are enduring it, and that's the important thing. I'm still in touch with my friends that I know in the brigade I was with. They've had some very ropey misses, but they're all still there. Touch wood. So, just a phenomenal bunch of soldiers and brave men. And
just finally, there is this peace deal, inverted commas, on the table. They don't seem that impressed with it, the soldiers. What was their thoughts about where this is going to end or continue?
Well, I was there when Mr. Trump decided to welcome Putin to Alaska. I think it's safe to say they're not very keen on the American president, would be the polite way of putting it. The deal is a scandal. Ukraine cannot give up that defensive line in the Donbass. It's not, strategically sensible in any way. It would be catastrophic to hand over those defended cities. So until something better comes along, they're going to have to fight on.
And that's the view of the guys you've spoken to?
Yeah, unanimously.
Right. Andrew, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Thanks for watching. For more from BFBS Forces News, like and subscribe to our channel.